G'day everyone. This is the second in what is probably going to be a four-part series on the Fremantle traffic bridge and who is checking for cycling specific hazards around this particular project. Now, I want to make clear what I'm aiming at here. The detour is supposed to be set up for, the detour is not aimed at strong and fearless cyclists like the Premier. It's aimed at everybody else. It's aimed at people that aren't comfortable on riding on a road or a highway that's two lanes in each direction, or on a very busy bridge with trucks and cars and buses and all that kind of thing. The detour should be set up to cater for everyone aged 8 to 80. And, I think a perfect example of that would be the Minister for Transport, who is probably not that comfortable riding a bike on, say, Canning Highway or on the Stirling Highway Bridge, or even on Tideman Road with all the trucks going in and out of the port. And if you think that's a bit silly, well, why don't you go ask yourself? I think this photo here encapsulates it quite well. You've got a dad riding with his kid who's probably about 8 years old. And as you can see, we're riding along Canning Highway near East Street, and they actually had quite a few difficulties. And it's because of the problems that they faced that I'm pumping out these videos. If you can solve these issues for this kind of target market, all will be good. But I shouldn't have to tell you this, because the Austroads Guide to Temporary Traffic Management Part 2, Traffic Management Planning, clearly calls out who the vulnerable road users are in Table 3.2. Pedestrians, cyclists, people with disabilities, and other vulnerable road users such as children, parents with prams, users of small-wheeled vehicles, and mobility aids, and the elderly. And if you spend a bit of time actually using the detour or watching the detour, you'll see all these people attempting to use it with different levels of comfort, I guess you'd say. Clearly they're able to use it, but it's not a very pleasant experience. But let's go back to the beginning. What is the mission statement of Main Roads? Well, Main Roads strives to provide safe, reliable roads, bridges, and paths so you can get to where you need to go. Now, clearly, this bridge project is going to create a much better solution for cyclist and pedestrian once it's finished in late 2026. It's going to be great. It's going to replace the horrible, narrow, old footpath on the old wooden bridge. Great, excellent. And look, we've got to put up with a detour in the meantime. Sure, we have to, there is no solution apart from going over the Stirling Highway Bridge. We can't put up a flying fox or use, punts to go back and forth or something like that. The detour is what it is. However, it needs to be, safe, reliable, and comfortable. It shouldn't be a mess. Now, the first video in this series looked at signage that's been missing for months, possibly up to 6 months, and why is it missing? I mean, it just shows that there's just not a great level of care in dealing with cyclists and pedestrians around this worksite. And interestingly enough, the comms team for the project or for Main Roads are telling people that they should walk or cycle to their destinations instead of drive, which is a great idea. I mean, look at the front page of the West Australian yesterday. Freo's year of driving slowly. Clearly, when the old bridge closes, it's going to be traffic bedlam down there, and a lot of cyclists who are currently riding on the road across the old bridge are going to be forced to ride across Stirling Highway Bridge instead, and either ride on the road or take to the footpath because there's just too much traffic and it's uncomfortable. However, that communication has been done with no idea of the hazards that cyclists are currently facing when using the detour, just no idea whatsoever. And that's, again, why this series is being put together. And this begs the question, has anyone from Department of Transport, Main Roads, or the project actually cycled the detour, not walked it, not looked at it on Google Maps, not driven around it, but cycled the detour, either before providing advice to the public? Because seriously, if someone hasn't done that, then it's a real breach of, I think, the duty of care to users of the detour. Now, this Austroads report came out in March. It's probably worth having a read. Probably had some input from people in Main Roads, but unfortunately not associated with this project. maybe those people should be identified within main roads and temporarily seconded to the project to clean this stuff up, because this report has some good stuff in here about improving cycling and micro mobility planning. And one of the tools is actually the cycling level of service tool, just a very basic spreadsheet which looks at the risks. And in fact, the next video in this series is going to look at the risk of collision at side roads, in particular at East Street and Pensioner Guard Road. It's a good tool, should be used. Has anyone used it? Probably not. Now, what we're going to look at today is three very obvious hazards along Canning Highway. And look, these are small things. They're easy to fix potentially. They're not very expensive. But the fact that they still exist well over 6 months after this detour was put in place, it's just symptomatic of a wider problem with this project, and that is very little thought and effort has been put into providing everyday cyclists, not the strong and fearless cyclists like the Premier, but everyday cyclists with safe, reliable roads, bridges, and paths. Now let's actually look at where this is. It's in between East Street and Glyde Street along Canning Highway on the northern side. And in theory, what should have been done before this detour was set up was a risk assessment should have been done. This is all part of the temporary traffic management planning process. And, it should be the first step in the preparation of a traffic management plan. Was one done? I'm not entirely, well, I have no clue whether one was done, but was one done looking specifically at the hazards to cyclists and pedestrians? Because it's quite clear that cyclists need to be addressed on every job. Now, you need to consider the experienced cyclist, like the Premier, who would be happy to stay in a traffic lane, and less experienced cyclists and children who would need alternative routes. And, I think a classic thing here would be, what if the Minister for Transport decides that she wants to ride from North Fremantle Station down to the southern end of the bridge and check out the detour for herself? How's that going to go? Just imagine what it would be like if she turned up on a comfortable kind of Dutch bike, dressed in a usual work outfit, because she's not one of these. She's not like the Premier, dressed in lycra. She'd be in suit and all the rest of it. How do you think that's going to go, given the maps, the signage, and the general layout of the detour, and the lack of thought and care at the moment? Probably a career limiting move for certain people. But anyway, look, here's an example straight from the Austroads guide about documenting the risk management process to feed into the traffic management plan. And the question here is, well, what cycling issues were identified and documented for the Fremantle Traffic Bridge project when the risk management process was carried out? I mean, was a risk management process carried out? I'm assuming one was carried out, but were any cycling issues actually identified? Now, this is what I mean by how simple the existing issues are in this location. Head height tree branches. No one wants to be coat hangered by a tree branch as they're riding along here. You can see that this dad in the picture with his kid riding behind has had to duck to go under those tree branches. Now, this was filmed back in February. It's now May, and those tree branches have simply gotten bigger. Now, you might be saying, oh, this is a town of East Fremantle problem. It's up to council to trim the tree back. Great. Okay. If you've identified the risk and you've identified the owner, has anyone actually reached out to the town of East Fremantle and asked them to send someone out there with a saw to just trim the vegetation back? And ideally, trim the vegetation back all the way along this route within their jurisdiction. So if that's from East Street back to the Stirling Highway Bridge, get them to clean the whole lot up. It's as simple as that. Now, the second one, these sign poles in the middle of the path. Now, I get that for the last, 30 years or so, these poles have not been an issue. And why is that? Because cycling traffic along here would have been absolutely minimal, so not a problem. However, you've now decided to use this as a route, and you've got a very obvious hazard right in the middle of the path, and nothing's been done about it. I mean, this should have been identified as a risk. Now, if the people who did the risk assessment or the route planning did it from Google Maps, or they only walked the route, or they just drove around it, they would not pick this up as an issue. But if you try riding through there on a mountain bike, trying to dodge those poles and not clip the poles with your handlebars, you would very quickly see it as an issue. And in particular, if you've got a cargo bike which is a bit wider, or a tricycle which is wider, or you're towing a trailer with kids in it, or you've got little kids following you behind on their bike and they're a bit wobbly, you would understand the risk of collision very, very clearly. So that sign needs to be removed. Now, okay, maybe the sign needs to stay. Okay, find a different way of mounting it, which doesn't involve putting poles in the middle of the path. Maybe you just need to put in a, I-beam on the side of the path next to the wall there, a nice solid mount, which only requires, one leg, which can continue to hold the sign up. But your issue here clearly is there's been a dramatic increase in traffic or cycling traffic along here. It's going to increase much, much more at the end of the year when the Fremantle Traffic Bridge closes. Someone's inevitably going to collide with that and injure themselves. And you might be saying, no, that'll never happen. Well, I have experience from this from 5 years ago from the West Connects project over in Sydney. And there's this particular power pole here which was left in, well, essentially the same thing happened. They had to set up a detour for cyclists around the work sites, and they failed to remove some poles which were very obvious collision hazards. And although this was raised with them by Bicycle New South Wales on a couple of occasions, and there were site visits undertaken, they were adamant that the pole was fine, that they didn't have to move it, and if they just put a bit of yellow tape around it, that would remediate the risk. And then a couple of weeks later, a cyclist collided with it and was carted off in an ambulance and, had facial injuries and all that kind of stuff. So if you have a hazard, someone's probably going to collide with it. And he's saying, no, 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 there's no chance that'll ever happen. Well, in that case, why do we need traffic barriers? If no one ever collides with things accidentally, why do we need these safety barriers everywhere? In a classic case, of course, is on the freeway where we have these big, yellow water-filled crash barriers to stop people, colliding head-on into the concrete barriers. At least it slows them down a little bit. If, you know, and we know if you have enough traffic and enough silly people on the road, eventually something's going to go wrong. Doesn't matter if they're truck drivers or bus drivers or car drivers or cyclists or scooter riders or skateboarders or whatever. Inevitably, bad things will happen. So just remove the hazard entirely. And similarly, why do we need vehicles like this? You go down under the Narrows Bridge any day of the week, you'll see these parked there. Why are they there? Oh, because drivers on the freeway, when there's a breakdown, have a really bad habit of running into emergency vehicles or tow trucks, or the broken down vehicle, or someone who's out of the vehicle trying to do something. It's bonkers that we need this stuff, but it's a fact of life. So, get rid of these poles, please. Now, the other thing that would also very clear to cyclists, but maybe not clear to someone walking through, is just this section of unpatched path. Clearly, I guess a utility company's come along and done something in the past, and they've lifted off the asphalt and they haven't bothered replacing it. And you might be saying again, oh, this is a town of East Fremantle problem. Okay, sure, maybe it is, but you've decided to use this as a detour route. And the risk here, of course, is the combination of that and the poles. A cyclist is going to go through the poles, hit that sandy patch, lose control, and crash. And uh, you know, and this kind of thing does happen, particularly with cyclists who are less experienced or with little kids. So what's the answer? Well, get a wheelbarrow full of asphalt and repair it. Either, ask the council to do it, or given that you've got, worksite staff a couple hundred meters away, get them to just come and drop something on it and fix it up. Like I said, these are not very complicated, expensive, difficult to fix issues, but these hazards should have been identified months ago. They should have been identified mid last year or early last year, even before the project started, and they should have been remediated before any maps or any signage was put up to start detouring cyclists. And clearly, none of that's happened. So we go back to these questions. Did anyone conduct a pertinent site survey? Now, if you're familiar with the road safety audit terminology, you'd know what a pertinent survey is. It simply means, in these circumstances, get on a bike and ride back and forth and have a look. Now, were these issues identified and documented during the planning phase? what treatment options were evaluated if, assuming these were identified, and who's carrying out regular pertinent checks of the detour route to make sure things like, fresh vegetation is not encroaching on the route, or that signage hasn't fallen over or been stolen and stuff like that. Is any of that happening at the moment? Because there doesn't seem to be any sign of that. Now, also from the Guide to Temporary Traffic Management, if we look at part 412.2, long-term projects, this is for projects longer than 6 months, and obviously this is one of them. This has already been going for longer than 6 months. And it says, should incorporate formal review procedures as part of a continuous improvement approach to ensuring the continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the traffic management plan. So it's been going for more than 6 months. Has a review taken place? I'm guessing not. My take is that a formal road safety audit should be undertaken. Engage some road safety auditors, get them to bring in some cyclists from West Cycle or whoever to provide some advice on this, and use that audit to fix all the issues associated with this route. So look, in summary, fixing these issues in this video shouldn't be expensive. But it's doubtful any of them would have been detected by walking or driving, or even just sitting at a desk, looking at this stuff on Google Maps. It's just not clear, unfortunately. And pertinent audits are a must. Someone needs to get out on the bike and look at this stuff. All right, the next video, we're going to have a look at the identification of issues at road crossings. Like I said, it's going to be the corner of East Street and Canning Highway, and the corner of Tyburn Road and Pensioner Guard Road, where there's some pretty clear issues. So stay tuned for that. That'll be up in the next week or so. Anyway, thanks for watching.